Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Visual Wilderness. We are really happy to have you with us today, as usual. And as usual, we are here with Johnny and Brent, and it's going to be a good one. So I'm going to introduce Jay tonight, and then we're trying to mix it up a little with introductions. So the amazing Jay Patel, my husband of 8 years. He's a photographer. He is a lover of Starbucks coffee, but he loves Australian coffee more. And he once asked me if rabbits laid eggs. True that. And he has 3 master's degrees, so I don't know where the rabbit question came from. But anyway, there you go. Now you know something about Jay Patel you didn't know before. And Jay Patel, would you like to introduce your wife?
Yes, and that is beautiful Reina Patel, who I've been married to for 8 years. And if she was ever to say yes again, I will marry her again in a heartbeat. And what can I say? Reina's weakness, which is my weakness as well, is chocolate.
Chocolate. Mm-hmm.
If Reina is bad, the easiest trick is to throw some chocolates in the room, slam the door shut, and wait for 10 minutes, and you'll hear giggling laughter out of the room and chomping on chocolates, and it is safe to go in, even if there were rabbits laying eggs in there. All right, I will turn it over to Johnny Spencer.
Thank you, my guru. I'm going to introduce the B-man, Mr. Brent Mail, and that is my dog's barking at someone coming home, so I do apologise. He is the marketing guru, and actually, we have got a bit of a thing. I have got a bit of a bromance for him, so yeah. I'll just leave it at that. It's nothing weird. Dude, I can feel the love.
Poor Stacey's going to get jealous.
He's a good guy, all-round good guy. I haven't got a bad word to say. So. All right, over to you, B-man.
All right, I'll introduce Mr. Johnny Spencer, aka Chinese Panther, and he was named that in New Zealand by someone we know. Johnny is a gangster with a heart of gold, and he's super smart. He's actually smarter than me. So there we go. He's a great photographer and videographer, and yeah, cool, awesome. Let's get into it, guys.
Let's
do it.
All right, let's do this. So we are going to talk about our May assignment, which was raw processing. For this assignment, we put out a raw file, one of our files, and the expectation was that everyone would take a crack at processing it. We were the rules were wide open. You could do with it whatever you chose, and I think it was really neat to see the creativity that people displayed, all these different ideas. It was really neat. You know, you start out with a single file, and you come up with so many different ways of looking at it. So that was really cool. So let's go ahead and start. I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to show you some of the images. And we're going to talk about why we thought they stood out, you know, what it was that made us choose these to sort of show you, you know, what we've been doing, what people have been doing, sorry.
So before we get into it, I just, sweetheart, if you would allow me,
Mm-hmm.
I want to point out to everybody that, hey, the assignment focused on creativity, and we kept the rules wide open. So a lot of the comments that you hear from us today will be about creativity and how you can look at things differently, even though the assignment may seem kind of mundane and boring. Creativity is something that is going to take your photography to the next level.
All right, so one of the images that that stood out to us was this shot from Tanya Court. What stood out to me was the crop more than anything. She took away the distraction of the sky, she took away the distraction of the rocky foreground, and she made this image into something that was really eye-catching. This leading line that takes you in from the right, all the people on the beach. It's a simpler image, and yet it really grabs your attention because of the unusual crop. You guys have anything you want to add to that?
No, I actually completely agree with you. I think one of the problems that I saw in this image was that If I break the image down into things that create mood and feelings and things that create sort of form and function, or necessary evil, the rocks are necessary evil because the way we took the shot was we didn't have a good enough vantage point to get rid of it. The things that created mood and feelings in this image were the turquoise water. I mean, you show that to people and they were like, yeah, I really would rather be at the beach than stuck in my office job. So what this image does is it minimizes that rock structure and just sort of, and then the rest of the image, 2/3 of the image is filled with that turquoise water that everybody was like, I just wish I was there,
Yeah.
kind of feeling.
Yeah, definitely. So let's move on and take a look at this next shot. This one had us all just laughing so hard. This is from Rick Baker. And you know what? The only wine for a visual wilderness photographer, Australian Patel Red. So it had us rolling. I mean, all of us, Johnny and Brent, you guys mentioned it on the weekly roundup, and just so much fun.
Yeah, epic. Good job.
Yeah.
Good one, Rick. And I think Rick actually, he was the visual wilderness photographer of the week because of, well, this and many other things. But this was the image that really caught our attention. I love it. And it's dry humor. It's a dry sense of humor. It's an Australian dry red wine. So there we go.
Right.
But this also goes to show you guys that, look, you don't have to take things seriously. A lot of these assignments, photography is fun. It's not a competition or a dog-eat-dog world out there. It's just go and have fun with your own stuff and just forget about what everybody else has to say. And you'll come up with something which is add some humor into your work, and life will be great.
Yeah, and be creative. This is what it is. It's thinking outside the box.
Totally, Jay, and I love your philosophy there on just do what you like to do. And I remember you saying that when we were in New Zealand filming and you were shooting, and Johnny said, Jay, well, is this a good image? What do you think? And Jay would say, well, if you like it, it's good.
Yeah. Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. I mean, you know what? That's what it comes down to. I always tell people, if you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong.
Correct.
They're always asking me, is this the right filter? Is this the right lens? Is this the right way to do this? And you know what? There is no right or wrong. If you're not having fun, though, you're doing it wrong. That's where the red flag ought to come up. So, all right, next shot. This is one from Axel de Torres Kurth. And look at this. Can you guys see that he's taken out all the people except this one couple in the center? He has taken this image and turned it into a story about these two. It's a love story. It's just this beautiful, simple image about the two of them and this, solitary moment, which of course wasn't solitary at all. So I thought this was fun. I thought it was neat. I mean, first of all, he took the time to clone out all those people, which is no small task.
Amazing job. It looks seamless too. Like, you zoom right in on that thing. He's done a great job.
Yeah.
And not only that, but he actually changed the mood and the feeling of this image. If you were to submit this shot to the travel magazine, they would be like, yeah, I would take that up. And say, this is like a stock photography material where people would just consume this. So what he did was he took a shot which is more about landscape and busy street photography, sort of journalistic photography kind of thing, and turned it into a shot which has a different mood and a feeling completely. So well done, Alex.
Yeah, awesome job. Now here's another one where Dan Pito decided to do something similar. He took out all the other people and he left just the two in the center there, but he created this beautiful sort of Japanese style watercolor image. Now his original image is here, and after some input from others in the group, You can see it's a pretty big change. I love this finished image. First of all, I love the fact that he made changes based on what other people said. I think that listening to critique, considering it, making changes based upon it is really cool. But I also love the mood of this shot. I mean, he took it to this watercolor feel, but he created ghosts, and I think that just looks amazing. I think it's a really interesting, fun idea. And, Jay was talking about changing the mood, and this is a completely different mood, even though he did something similar by cloning everybody out except those two.
Agreed, totally agreed. I loved that image. And I did see his first image and I thought, yeah, okay. But the second image was, wow, that was a big change and a great change.
Yeah.
And that's the advantage of being part of this community, is you can put it out there and people can give you the honest opinion and also advise you on possibly how you can make it better, and then you can go back and change it and see if you get a better image or not. And that's why we created this community, to learn off each other. That's awesome.
Yeah. So nicely done, Dan. I really like what you did there. All right, and here's another watercolor effect. This one is by Stephanie Schmitz, and notice the mood. Again, completely different. This is a bright, sunny day. It's fresh. It's about color and tone. I think it's really cool.
Yeah, it looks like somebody just painted that. I mean, you can pass this off as a painting and sell it at a fine arts store, and it would be somebody who would be like, oh yeah, I love that place.
And what is it with us liking these images where they've taken everybody out? I think what I'm noticing is that as nature photographers, we all want quiet, pristine beauty with no humans.
Yeah.
Or
minimal
crowded beaches.
Yeah.
Solitude.
Solitude, exactly. Yeah. So really nice job, Stephanie. Neat shot. Neat processing, I should say. All right, here's another one. This is Matthew Shipp. And Jay, I think you wanted to talk a little bit about this.
Yes. So I noticed Matthew commented on something, and I also commented on a few of these images, that I noticed that a lot of people, when they try to do a realistic approach, they had a difficult time dealing with the highlights, particularly in that line of wave that you see right in the center of the image, center left of the image. And this is a pretty typical problem of shooting waterfalls, shooting beaches. Even though everything is perfectly exposed, everything is sunlit, the highlights in the water sometimes reflect so much light back in the camera that your camera has a difficult time handling that. The situation also occurs when you're photographing white birds in the forest area or a grasslands, because the white birds reflect so much light that they end up being overexposed. So what we're going to show you today is how we go about dealing with this situation, because we find this all the time in our landscape photography adventures.
So with that very neat and tidy segue, we're going to take you over to Jay's screen. He's going to share his screen, and he's going to talk about how we do that. He's going to actually walk you through the process quickly here of how he brings back the highlight detail in a case like this. So Jay, you're getting your screen ready for us.
Can you guys see that?
We can see that. Perfect.
All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go ahead and first talk about what the problem is for an image like this. So bear with me when I open this image in a raw converter. So when you shoot an image like this, and if I were to look at camera defaults, and look at the histogram, everything looks very good, but you see that there is this little small peak up here. And that peak corresponds to really bright areas that are in this line of wave. Now, what a lot of people do is we can make adjustments to all these settings, and I'm not going to go through them one at a time, but what I've done is I've made adjustments and sort of saved them for you so you can see what happens. So let's suppose you make adjustments to this image, and you end up exposing right for the sky and for the water. Then if you make adjustments to the image and expose things really good for sky and water, things look pretty nicely, except you notice that that little histogram peak is still pretty bunched up over here. So if I were to zoom in, even though nothing is overexposed per se, but the bunching off that histogram, what it means is there aren't enough details being spread out in those highlights. So even though not really truly overexposed, but there is a loss of detail because of loss of contrast in there. So in a case like this, well, what I did for this particular image, if I wanted to get everything correct, Matthew, is first pick the settings on here as well as the tone curve adjustments to expose properly for, in this case, the sky and the foreground rocks. Then what I did was I selected a different set of settings that expose properly for the water, which is, you can see the nice rich green color, the turquoise colors. And in this case, a lot of times what happens is my white balance shifts a little bit because water reflects light differently than the rocks do. So I now have two images. And then the third one that I did was I exposed it just for the highlights. Now you notice that the histogram peak that was over here is shifted slightly to the left, and it is spread out. Now if I were to zoom into this area, you can actually see the details in it. I'm on my LCD, so I can't really tell. I'm going to ask Verena and everybody else, can you guys see the details?
Yes. Yes,
Yeah.
it's visible. We can see the details.
All right.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So here's one where you couldn't see any details, I'm assuming.
Yep.
And here's one where you can see the details. But when you expose this for the water, rest of the image becomes dark. And I noticed a couple of photos that were sort of had the right highlight details, but were fairly dark overall. So then what I do is I open all of these three images in Photoshop and make a layer out of it and mask them together. So I'm going to show you how the layer structure works and how the masking is done. So before I go into that, I wanted to make sure that if anybody has a question so far on these settings or what we're doing or why we're doing it.
I think we're okay so far.
All right. All right, so I'm going to cancel out of there. And in here, here's my Photoshop. Can you guys see the Photoshop file?
Yep.
All right. So I've created a very simple layer structure. I'm going to go over each layer one at a time. So at the bottom, what I did was I exposed the bottom layer for the sky and also for the rocks. So that was one of my raw files. Now middle layer over here, and if I'll disable the mask, this is exposed for the water. And now you notice that the highlights are messed up, and you can tell by looking at just the histograms of this. And then on top of that, there is a layer which I will show you by disabling the mask. I put highlights for the water, okay? And now you can see again, the histogram sort of looks like what it did in the raw converter. Now, what happened was, the first thing I noticed when I did this was that I had messed up my raw converter slightly. There was a red tinge in the sky over here. So what I did was I created a simple layer with a mask that looks like a GND filter, very much like a GND filter, as you can see. And I used a curves layer to adjust for the red tint. So I'm going to turn this on and off so you guys can see. So you can see the sky has slightly red tint, and now the sky is more blue, which looks more natural.
It's a very subtle change there. But if Jay opens up that window, there it is, the curves window, you can see he actually adjusted the blues and the reds just enough to fix that color. That's something we do all the time. You know, it's hard sometimes when you're processing layers separately from one another, and then, or processing images separately from one another, and then combining them in layers, because sometimes when you put one layer on top of the other, a color cast that you didn't notice will become apparent to you, or because of the comparison between those two layers, you'll see that little bit of a color cast, and this is an easy way to pull it out.
Now, if you guys want to know how to correct for the color cast, there's an easy trick. Draw little selection around the sky as much as you can, and you're going to refine the edge a little bit here, maybe about 150 to 200 pixels. And then when you open up a curves layer, which I'm going to go ahead and do over here, and you look at my red channel, you will see that there is actually a pretty nice peak in here. That peak corresponds to the colors in the sky. Now, if you look at the blue channel, the peak is over here. So if you want to increase the blues, all you have to do is just move that peak slightly up. If you want to decrease the reds, you go over here and move that peak slightly down. Now, the color adjustment has to be very subtle. If you adjust too much, then it'll go away. So just
it'll be ugly.
Yep. So I just wanted to let you know that we use histograms, color histograms, to be able to actually go ahead and figure out what adjustments we need to make. All right?
That's really how you know where to put the point on the curve there and adjust it. It's if you just stick it anywhere, it won't necessarily do what you want it to do. That's why that histogram is superimposed on the curves tool.
All right, so the next thing I did was I wanted to make sure that I put the water back to where it needs to be. So I ended up making a very, very rough mask for the water, and let me show you what it looks like. It is just a very I just used a luminosity masking technique to make mask out of water. Now my mask doesn't have to be perfect. I can make it perfect if I want, but it takes too long. As long as very little contribution occurs on the sky and the clouds, and majority of the contribution is restricted to water, it actually makes for a very good image. So here's one without. See how dark the water looks and how bright the water looks. Now comes the tricky part. Now we need to make sure that this little highlight in here is gone, which corresponds to the highlights in parts of the image. So what I did was I usually, it's very easy. You just use a color range tool and just select the highlights, as you can see. And you can go ahead and use the range to restrict your highlights just to the wave, or you can actually go ahead and use multiple selections to clear out the mask. So if you were to look at my mask for the highlights, you can see that everywhere there are highlights, I have just selected the mask and darkened everything else out. Now again, my mask is not perfect, and neither does it need to be perfect. All you need to do is replace that highlights to bring down the tonal range. So now watch what happens to this particular peak over here when I turn that on. See how it's spread out and moved to the left? And then if you were to zoom in, you can actually see, and I'm going to ask you guys if you can see. Can you guys see the highlights being restored?
You can see it.
Awesome.
Yep.
Now my last two layers are actually pretty simple. One is just an overall S-curve adjustment, which is very slight. As you can see, I've done a slight S-curve adjustment on this. And the other one is the highlights adjustment. Again, bring out the highlights and pull out the contrast in the highlights. So sort of like an S-curve adjustment, but only restricted to the highlights portion of it. And that just gives the highlight a little bit of more texture. Not necessarily, I mean, if you want, but if you're a perfectionist like us, go right ahead.
So this looks like a complicated blend. You know, we understand that it looks complicated, but really what we're doing here is we're creating 3 layers by processing the same image 3 times. Then we're stacking those 3 images to create those layers. And then for each layer, we're just selecting the area that we want to show. And that's what the mask is. And then we go in once we've created those layers and masks. And we might make some extra adjustments, like Jay's sky color balance layer, his contrast layer, and his highlights fine-tune layer.
Yeah, so essentially the 3 layers are, one is for the sky, one's for the water, and one's for the highlights. Those are the important ones. The rest of the adjustments is up to how perfectionist you want to be for you. So, and the whole process kind of took me about maybe 10 minutes or less. Doesn't really take very long once you kind of figure out what luminosity masking does.
Jay, can I ask you a favor?
Yeah.
Any chance you can leave that file, that Photoshop file, the layered file, in the Visual Wilderness community so that I can deconstruct it a little bit so that it's totally clear for me what you've done?
It's not my shot.
Yes, that would be fine. It's actually my shot now that I think about it, and that's absolutely fine. I was wondering why he was pausing there. I forgot it was my shot.
Okay.
But yes, we will do that. It's Jay's processing. It's my shot, but it was taken specifically for something like this, and it was meant to be shared. So, yeah, that's absolutely fine, and I think it's a good idea. I think there might be other people who would like to do the same.
So what we'll do is, Brent, what I'll do is I will make this layered Photoshop files smaller because the layered file is huge.
Yes.
And we will have to host it up on a different account, like someplace.
Okay.
And then I can put a link to it.
Yep.
Cool.
That's fine. We'll discuss the details of that after the show, and we'll figure that one out and make sure you guys have access to that before long. And meanwhile, Jay's going to show us another technique. He posted a photo in the assignment forum this time. He was having fun with it and wanted to play with something a little different. And he created this image that you see on the screen now that is sort of, it almost feels like you are the lucky guy who owns the house on that ledge, and you're looking out through the window on a rainy day at this gorgeous scene in front of you. So so he's going to show us how he did this. Just in the spirit of creativity, in the spirit of this this assignment, which was just playing and enjoying the creative drive.
Now,
go ahead.
If you do own a house over here, I suspect it will cost a couple of $1 million to have a view like this.
Yeah.
And there were houses behind us, apartments and a bunch of. I was like very jealous for a while. Okay, so what did I do? So let me explain. What I did for this one was very simple. I went ahead and grabbed a file from one of the stock agencies that we work with. And all the file was water droplets, right? Simple water droplets. And now, Photoshop, one of the questions people ask is, why do you need layers and masks? Well, layers and masks have this amazing ability to manipulate photographs in a creative way that our turnkey solution like Photomatics or NIX HDR effects does not give you. So one of the best things about layers and masks is you can play around with these blending modes. So for this one, I chose multiply. And what happened instantly was that it took 2 layers, layers 1 and the background, and multiplied with one another. And that's how I created. But before I go there, let me show you one other thing that I did. I took this particular image and I'm going to compress it. So I'm going to flatten it. And this image, there is a great creative filter on here called lens blur. And I'm not going to do this, but I'm going to show you how it works. What lens blur does is you can actually select different lens types, iris shapes and blade and rotation and a bunch of other parameters. And it creates an effect as if you're looking at a out of focus image here, and you can do all kinds of depth mapping and some weird techniques. But essentially, what I did was I did lens blur. Now, why did I do this? Why did I show this particular technique and not something else? Well, one of the cool things about this technique is, let's suppose that in your layer structure, you were not able to restore the highlights. So let's say the highlight layer was not restored and you only had layers that, and I'm going to flatten this image again, where you had this little peak in the highlights. Now what happens is when you do a creative technique like this, so my Photoshop skills, I'm going to assume, are not good enough to be able to do restore highlights. If that's the case, if I am going to do lens blur, what I'm going to end up with, that highlight will become less of a part of a photograph. They will no longer matter because people will not be able to tell the exact details that are in the photograph. And by doing that, I take away my weakness. There is another very interesting effect that occurs on any kind of blur image is the histogram compresses. So you see that little peak on the highlight, it got distributed by the water and sort of disappeared. So
I think it would help to show a before and after of the histogram, go to the open and then to, yeah, just like that. So you can see what's happening to that histogram as he blurs the image.
Right, so here's a histogram and you can see the highlights, and when I do the blur, and you can see how the histogram compressed from either end. And that is what a blur filter does. It compresses the histogram.
And compressing the histogram means you've reduced the contrast overall.
Correct. So you have reduced the contrast overall and you've created sort of a dreamy effect. So I took that image and on top of that I put what we call water drops. Now all kinds of blending modes are here and you can use a lot of these blending modes. A couple of my favorites are multiply, screen, and overlay, soft light. And you can see different kind of effects that it has. For this particular one, I just chose multiply because I was just in a mood to show you guys what happens with the multiply image. So, and I could have done it with any other modes too. Not all of them, but I know some that work and some that don't work. But multiply works in here. Screen will work as well. But what happened was that the image which is bright in multiply will make it darker. As you can see, the histogram shifted towards left. And it reduces the contrast as well. So then what I did was I went ahead and added a layer to brighten it up, a curves layer to brighten it up and leave the dark area. So what it does is it'll shift the histograms towards right again and restore the contrast, as you can see. Now along with the contrast will also come brilliant colors. So by using two modes, and then you can also play around with opacity in the modes as to how dark or how light you like it, and you can do that with both of them here. You can also go ahead and do different modes, overlay modes on the curves layer itself to make it really yucky image or HDR look. But anyway, so what I did was, I created two layers and then played with the opacity to get my original layer. And essentially the only opacity I changed was the multiply opacity. I bumped it down to 75% so the image wasn't quite as dark. And that is it. That is as simple. In fact, this particular technique took me only about 3 minutes to do, because all you have to do is just blur the image, stick another image up on top of it, change the mode, and adjust a small curves adjustment to it.
Really, the time in this image, in something like this, comes from just playing with it. You know, right. You have your options are just wide open, so you can get really creative with it. Just have fun with it. Learn Photoshop a little bit more, and you know, just make it your own. So. We want to thank all of you who participated in this this assignment. We know it was kind of different from what we've done in the past, and we thought we'd throw it out there and see what people did with it. Our next assignment coming up is
motion.
Motion. There we go. Moving subject, in fact. So another day we're going to do moving your camera, but for this one we're doing moving subject. So yeah, we're really looking forward to seeing what people come up with. It's always really neat. for us to go in and, sort of start seeing what this sort of amazing force of the community, what you guys are coming up with. It is so cool to see.
So this Photoshop lesson, as well as the layered Photoshop file, will be available to be accessed by the community and the community only. Thank you for being around, and hopefully this will be sort of a learning experience for everybody.
Yep. So thanks for coming out tonight, guys. It was great having Johnny and Brent on the show, as always. And we will see everybody next time.
Awesome.
Thanks, guys. Catch you in Visual Wilderness. Take care.
All right. Thank you, guys.